Tonight, we're going to journey into one of history's most enduring mysteries, one that has captivated minds for over 2 millennia. Close your eyes, get comfortable, and let me tell you about a lost civilization that may never have existed at all, yet continues to shape our understanding of the ancient world. This is the story of Atlantis, and the question that has haunted scholars, dreamers, and explorers for generations. Who really discovered it? Welcome to History for Sleep, where we explore the forgotten corners of human civilization through the gentle rhythm of storytelling. I'm your guide through the shadows of the past, and tonight we're diving deep into waters both literal and metaphorical. Because the story of Atlantis isn't just about a sunken city. It's about the eternal human desire to find paradise lost, to uncover truths hidden beneath the waves of time. But here's what most people don't realize about Atlantis. The question isn't really whether it existed. The question is why we need it to exist. And that need, that desperate search for a perfect civilization lost to time, has driven some of the most fascinating archaeological discoveries and spectacular hoaxes in human history. So who really discovered Atlantis? Was it Plato, the Greek philosopher who first described it in vivid detail over 2,000 years ago? Was it Heinrich Schliemann, the amateur archaeologist who claimed to have found evidence of it in the ruins of Troy? Or perhaps it was one of the countless modern researchers who have pointed to everything from Santorini to Antarctica as the true location of this mythical realm? The answer might surprise you, because in tracing the footsteps of those who claim to have found Atlantis, we uncover something far more interesting than any lost city. We discover the very human tendency to see what we want to see, to find patterns in chaos, and to create meaning from mystery. Let's begin where all great mysteries should begin, in the shadows of ancient Athens, in the mind of a philosopher who understood that sometimes the most powerful truths are found in stories that never happened at all. Picture this. The year is approximately 360 BCE. The great city-states of Greece are locked in endless conflicts. Democracy is struggling, and a brilliant philosopher named Plato sits in his academy, surrounded by eager students. He's been working on a series of dialogues, philosophical conversations that explore the nature of justice, the ideal state, and what it means to live a good life. But Plato has a problem. How do you teach people about the perfect society when they've never seen one? How do you show them what corruption looks like when they're swimming in it? Sometimes, the most effective way to illuminate truth is through fiction. And so, almost casually, Plato begins to tell a story. It's a story within a story, actually. He has his character, Critias, recount a tale supposedly passed down through generations, originating from the great lawgiver Solon, who had traveled to Egypt and learned it from ancient priests. The story speaks of a mighty island nation that existed 9,000 years before Plato's time, a civilization so advanced, so powerful, so perfectly organized that it dominated much of the known world. This island was called Atlantis, and according to Plato's account, it was nothing short of paradise engineered. Concentric rings of land and water, connected by bridges and tunnels, temples covered in silver and gold, harbors filled with ships from every corner of the world, citizens who lived in harmony under wise rulers, blessed by the god Poseidon himself. But here's where the story takes its dark turn, and where Plato reveals his true purpose. The Atlanteans, despite all their advantages, become corrupted by their own success. They grow arrogant, warlike, aggressive. They begin to conquer other lands not out of necessity, but out of greed. And so the gods, seeing this corruption, decide to teach them a lesson. In a single day and night, Atlantis is swallowed by the sea, disappearing forever beneath the waves. Now, here's what's fascinating about this account. Plato provides incredibly specific details. He tells us exactly where Atlantis was located, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. He gives us precise measurements for the island's dimensions. He describes its government structure, its military organization, even its agriculture and mining operations. This level of detail has led many people throughout history to assume that Plato must have been describing a real place. After all, why would someone make up such elaborate specifics? But here's what those people miss. Plato was not a historian. He was a philosopher. And in his philosophical method, detailed fictional examples were a powerful teaching tool. You see, Plato wasn't trying to preserve the memory of a lost civilization. He was holding up a mirror to his own society. The corruption of Atlantis was meant to reflect the corruption he saw in Athens. The perfect organization of early Atlantis was his blueprint for an ideal state. The catastrophic destruction was his warning about what happens when societies lose their moral compass. But even in Plato's time, some people missed the point entirely. His student Aristotle, one of the greatest minds in human history, had to explicitly state that Plato had invented Atlantis to make a philosophical argument. He who created it destroyed it, Aristotle observed, essentially saying, "People, this is fiction. Stop looking for it." Yet even with this clear statement from someone who knew Plato personally, the search for Atlantis had already begun. Because humans, it seems, have an irresistible urge to turn meaningful fiction into literal fact. And this is where our story takes its first unexpected turn. Because the discovery of Atlantis wasn't really a discovery at all. It was a creation born from the intersection of human imagination and the very real human need to believe in something greater than ourselves. But Plato's account did something that even he might not have anticipated. It created a template, a set of criteria that future explorers and archaeologists would use to identify potential Atlantis sites around the world. Advanced civilization? Check. Sudden destruction? Check. Lost beneath water or otherwise vanished? Check. And so began what we might call the Great Atlantis Hunt, a quest that has continued for over 2 millennia and shows no signs of slowing down. From the ancient world to the modern day, people have been convinced they've found the real Atlantis. Some were sincere scholars following legitimate archaeological evidence. Others were charlatans seeking fame and fortune. Most fell somewhere in between. True believers whose enthusiasm exceeded their critical thinking skills. The first major discovery came not from an archaeologist, but from a Roman writer named Pliny the Elder, who lived in the 1st century CE. Pliny claimed that Atlantis had been located near the Canary Islands, and that traces of it could still be found there. This wasn't based on any archaeological evidence, mind you. Pliny was working purely from geographical speculation and perhaps a bit of wishful thinking. But Pliny's claim established a pattern that would repeat throughout history. Each generation would rediscover Atlantis in a location that reflected their current understanding of geography and their own cultural preoccupations. Medieval scholars placed it in the Atlantic Ocean because that's where they thought mysterious islands ought to be. Renaissance explorers located it in the Americas because that's where all the exciting new discoveries were happening. The pattern continued into the modern era, but with a crucial difference. Now people had better tools for finding things that weren't there. Enter Heinrich Schliemann, one of the most controversial figures in the history of archaeology. Schliemann was a German businessman who became obsessed with Homer's epic poems, particularly the Iliad. He was convinced that Troy was a real place, not just a literary creation, and he was determined to find it. Against all academic advice and conventional wisdom, Schliemann began excavating at a site in modern-day Turkey called Hisarlik. And incredibly, he found what appeared to be the ruins of ancient Troy. It was one of the most spectacular archaeological discoveries of the 19th century, and it made Schliemann famous worldwide. But success, as we learned from Plato's tale of Atlantis, can be corrupting. Schliemann became convinced that if he could find Troy, he could find anything. And what could be more spectacular than discovering Atlantis itself? According to Schliemann's own accounts, and this is where the story gets murky, he claimed to have found evidence of Atlantis at Troy. He described discovering a bronze vase containing ancient papyri that supposedly detailed the destruction of Atlantis. He claimed these documents proved that both Troy and Atlantis were real, and that survivors from Atlantis had founded other civilizations around the Mediterranean. The problem is, no one has ever seen these documents. Schliemann described them in detail, even claimed to have translated portions of them, but they never appeared in any museum or scholarly publication. When other archaeologists asked to examine them, Schliemann always had an excuse for why they weren't available. Modern scholars are virtually certain that Schliemann fabricated the entire story. He had a documented history of embellishing his discoveries, and the supposed Atlantis documents conveniently supported theories that would make him even more famous than he already was. But here's what's fascinating about Schliemann's claims. Even though they were almost certainly false, they had a profound impact on how people thought about Atlantis. For the first time, someone with legitimate archaeological credentials was claiming to have found physical evidence of Plato's lost civilization. The fact that these claims were later debunked didn't seem to matter. The seed had been planted. Schliemann's supposed discovery opened the floodgates for others who claimed to have found Atlantis. Some were outright fraudsters looking to make money from gullible investors or tourists. Others were sincere researchers who became so invested in their theories that they lost the ability to evaluate evidence objectively. And this brings us to one of the most important lessons in the story of Atlantis. The line between discovery and invention is often thinner than we'd like to admit. Every archaeological interpretation involves some degree of speculation, some filling in of gaps with educated guesses. The question is where you draw the line between reasonable inference and wishful thinking. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Atlantis discoveries became increasingly elaborate and increasingly divorced from actual evidence. Ignatius Donnelly, an American politician and amateur scholar, published Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, in 1882, claiming that Atlantis was the original source of all human civilization. According to Donnelly, survivors from Atlantis had spread across the globe after their homeland's destruction, carrying advanced knowledge to primitive societies and founding all the great ancient civilizations. Donnelly's book was a bestseller, and it established many of the ideas about Atlantis that persist to this day. But it was based almost entirely on speculation and selective interpretation of evidence. When legitimate scholars pointed out the flaws in his reasoning, Donnelly dismissed them as narrow-minded academics who couldn't see the bigger picture. This pattern of enthusiastic amateurs making grand claims about Atlantis while dismissing scholarly criticism would become a recurring theme in the story of Atlantis research. And it raises a troubling question. How do we distinguish between legitimate archaeological discovery and elaborate self-deception? The answer lies not just in the evidence itself, but in how that evidence is interpreted, presented, and subjected to critical scrutiny. Real archaeological discoveries can be replicated, verified by independent researchers, and integrated into our broader understanding of the past. Claims about Atlantis, by contrast, tend to exist in isolation, supported by selective evidence and resistant to critical evaluation. But the search for Atlantis wasn't entirely futile, because even though no one has ever found Plato's lost civilization, the quest to find it has led to some genuinely important archaeological discoveries. The problem is that these real discoveries often get overshadowed by the more sensational claims about Atlantis itself. For example, the search for Atlantis has led researchers to investigate ancient civilizations in places that might otherwise have been overlooked. Some of these investigations have revealed fascinating cultures that were genuinely lost to history, not because they sank beneath the waves, but because their stories weren't preserved in classical literature. The Minoan civilization on Crete is perhaps the best example of this. When archaeologist Arthur Evans began excavating at Knossos in 1900, he was partly motivated by theories connecting Crete to Atlantis. What he found was even more remarkable than he had hoped. Evidence of a sophisticated Bronze Age civilization that had thrived for over 1,000 years before mysteriously collapsing around 1450 BCE. The Minoans had elaborate palaces, advanced plumbing systems, beautiful frescoes, and a complex writing system that we still haven't fully deciphered. They were skilled sailors who traded throughout the Mediterranean, and they appear to have been relatively peaceful compared to their contemporaries. Most intriguingly, the Minoan civilization seems to have ended suddenly, possibly due to a combination of natural disasters and foreign invasions. Some of their settlements show evidence of destruction by fire or earthquake, and their influence in the broader Mediterranean world disappeared relatively quickly. Now, does this make the Minoans the real Atlantis? Almost certainly not. The chronology doesn't match Plato's account, the location is wrong, and there's no evidence that Minoan civilization ever reached the level of technological advancement that Plato described. But the Minoans do show us something important, that real lost civilizations can be just as fascinating as fictional ones, and sometimes more so. The discovery of Minoan civilization also illustrates another crucial point about the search for Atlantis. Sometimes the journey is more valuable than the destination. Evans didn't find Atlantis at Knossos, but he did find something genuinely significant. A previously unknown chapter in the story of human civilization. This pattern has repeated itself throughout the history of Atlantis research. Investigators looking for Plato's lost city have uncovered evidence of real ancient disasters, real forgotten cultures, and real changes in sea level and climate that have shaped human history. The fact that none of these discoveries prove the existence of Atlantis doesn't diminish their importance, but it does raise a question. If the search for Atlantis has led to legitimate archaeological discoveries, does it matter whether Atlantis itself was real or fictional? This question becomes even more complex when we consider that the line between myth and history is often blurrier than we might expect. After all, Troy was considered purely mythical until Schliemann proved otherwise. The ancient city of Ugarit was unknown to modern scholarship until it was discovered by accident in 1928. The Hittite Empire, despite being mentioned in the Bible, was dismissed by many historians as fictional until archaeological evidence proved its existence in the late 19th century. So perhaps the real question isn't whether someone discovered Atlantis, but whether the search for it has helped us discover something else. Something about ourselves, our past, and our relationship with the stories we tell about both. As we move deeper into the 20th century, the search for Atlantis began to take on an almost industrial quality. New technologies promised new possibilities for discovery, and ambitious explorers armed themselves with increasingly sophisticated tools. But with each advancement came new opportunities for both genuine discovery and elaborate deception. The invention of sonar in the 1940s revolutionized underwater exploration. Suddenly, researchers could map the ocean floor with unprecedented precision, revealing underwater mountains, valleys, and structures that had never been seen before. It wasn't long before someone claimed to have found Atlantis lurking in these sonar images. Dr. Maurice Ewing, a respected marine geologist, was studying the mid-Atlantic ridge when his sonar detected what appeared to be artificial structures on the ocean floor. The shapes were geometric, symmetrical, and seemed far too regular to be natural formations. For a brief moment, it looked like science might finally vindicate Plato's ancient tale. But as with so many Atlantis discoveries, closer examination revealed a more mundane explanation. The structures turned out to be natural rock formations, sculpted by underwater currents and volcanic activity into shapes that merely resembled human construction. It was a perfect example of pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns and familiar shapes in random data. This pattern of initial excitement followed by disappointment became a recurring theme in Atlantis research. Every new technology seemed to offer the promise of finally solving the mystery, but each advancement also revealed how easy it is to misinterpret ambiguous evidence. The development of scuba diving equipment in the 1950s opened up entirely new possibilities for underwater archaeology. For the first time, researchers could spend extended periods examining submerged sites in detail. This led to genuine discoveries of ancient harbors, sunken cities, and underwater settlements that had been lost to rising sea levels or seismic activity. But it also led to a proliferation of amateur Atlantis hunters who lacked the training to properly evaluate what they were seeing. Underwater formations that appeared artificial to untrained eyes were often revealed to be natural features when examined by qualified marine archaeologists. The enthusiasm of these amateur explorers was admirable, but their conclusions were frequently flawed. One of the most persistent modern claims came from a man named Charles Berlitz, who combined his background in linguistics with a passion for unexplained phenomena. In the 1960s, Berlitz became convinced that he had identified the true location of Atlantis in the Caribbean, specifically in the area known as the Bermuda Triangle. Berlitz argued that mysterious disappearances of ships and aircraft in this region were caused by some kind of ancient Atlantean technology still operating beneath the waves. He claimed that sonar readings had detected artificial structures on the ocean floor, including what appeared to be roads, buildings, and even pyramid-like formations. The Bimini Road, discovered in 1968 near the Bahamas, became central to Berlitz's theory. This underwater formation consists of rectangular limestone blocks arranged in what appears to be a deliberate pattern, stretching for nearly half a mile along the ocean floor. To Berlitz and his supporters, this was clearly evidence of an ancient civilization's engineering prowess. Mainstream archaeologists, however, quickly identified the Bimini Road as a natural formation created by the fracturing of limestone bedrock. The regular patterns that seemed so artificial were actually the result of predictable geological processes. But this explanation failed to satisfy those who were emotionally invested in the Atlantis connection. What made Berlitz's claims particularly influential was his skill as a popularizer. He wrote engaging books, appeared on television programs, and presented his theories with just enough scientific terminology to sound credible to general audiences. His work helped establish the modern template for Atlantis claims. Combine genuine archaeological discoveries with speculative interpretations, add a dash of cutting-edge technology, and present it all with absolute confidence. But Berlitz's approach also highlighted a fundamental problem with Atlantis research: the tendency to work backward from a desired conclusion. Instead of examining evidence objectively and seeing where it led, Atlantis researchers often started with the assumption that Atlantis existed somewhere and then looked for evidence to support that belief. This confirmation bias has plagued Atlantis research from the beginning, but it became particularly pronounced in the modern era as mass media amplified sensational claims. Television documentaries, popular books, and later internet forums created echo chambers where questionable theories could circulate without being subjected to rigorous criticism. The 1970s saw the emergence of what might be called high-tech Atlantis hunting. Researchers began using satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and computer modeling to search for evidence of lost civilizations. These tools were genuine scientific instruments, but they were often applied to support predetermined theories rather than to conduct open-ended investigation. Dr. Jim Whittle, an archaeologist who became fascinated with Atlantis theories, spent decades using these new technologies to investigate potential sites around the world. He examined underwater formations off the coast of Spain, studied satellite images of the Sahara Desert looking for evidence of ancient lakes, and used ground-penetrating radar to search for hidden structures beneath known archaeological sites. Whittle's work was methodical and technically sophisticated, but it suffered from the same fundamental flaw that affected all Atlantis research. He was looking for evidence to support a specific theory, rather than following the evidence wherever it might lead. When his high-tech investigations failed to reveal clear proof of Atlantis, he didn't abandon the theory. He simply moved on to the next potential location. This highlights one of the most frustrating aspects of the Atlantis mystery: the fact that negative evidence never seems to discourage true believers. When a proposed Atlantis site is thoroughly investigated and found wanting, Supporters don't conclude that Atlantis doesn't exist. They conclude that they haven't looked in the right place yet. The proliferation of potential Atlantis locations became almost comical by the 1980s. Researchers had placed Plato's lost civilization in virtually every body of water on Earth: the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Black Sea, the North Sea, and even in landlocked locations that had supposedly been underwater in ancient times. Each new location was presented with great fanfare and supported by selective evidence that seemed compelling to those who wanted to believe. But none of these theories could withstand serious scrutiny, and the multiplication of competing claims actually weakened the credibility of Atlantis research as a whole. The advent of the internet in the 1990s transformed the landscape of Atlantis research once again. Suddenly, anyone with a computer could publish their theories to a global audience without the filters of academic peer review or editorial oversight. This democratization of information had both positive and negative effects. On the positive side, it allowed legitimate researchers to share their findings more widely and to collaborate across institutional and national boundaries. Underwater archaeologists could post images of their discoveries online, making them available to scholars around the world for analysis and discussion. But the internet also enabled the rapid spread of misinformation and half-baked theories. Websites dedicated to Atlantis research proliferated, many of them mixing genuine archaeological discoveries with wild speculation and outright fabrication. The lack of quality control meant that casual readers often couldn't distinguish between credible research and elaborate fantasy. This digital explosion of Atlantis theories reached its peak with the work of authors like Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval, who used the internet to promote their ideas about ancient advanced civilizations. These writers combined legitimate archaeological mysteries with speculative theories about lost technology and hidden knowledge, creating compelling narratives that attracted large followings online. Hancock, in particular, became a master of what might be called archaeological storytelling. He identified genuine puzzles in the archaeological record, structures that seemed more advanced than expected, artifacts found in unexpected contexts, evidence of ancient catastrophes, and wove them into grand narratives about lost civilizations. His book, Fingerprints of the Gods, didn't explicitly claim to have found Atlantis, but it argued for the existence of an advanced prehistoric civilization that had been wiped out by a global catastrophe around 12,000 years ago. This civilization, according to Hancock, had possessed sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering that was later passed down to historical civilizations like ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Hancock's theories were appealing because they addressed real archaeological mysteries, while offering a simple, unified explanation for a wide range of puzzling evidence. If there had been an advanced prehistoric civilization, it would explain how ancient peoples accomplished seemingly impossible feats of engineering and astronomy. It would account for similarities between distant cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other. And it would provide a satisfying answer to the age-old question of whether humanity had risen from primitive beginnings or fallen from a golden age. But Hancock's work also illustrated the dangers of speculative archaeology. While he raised legitimate questions about conventional interpretations of the past, his alternative explanations often relied on selective evidence and logical leaps that couldn't withstand critical examination. When mainstream archaeologists pointed out flaws in his reasoning, Hancock and his supporters dismissed them as close-minded academics protecting their professional interests. This adversarial relationship between alternative researchers and mainstream archaeology became increasingly toxic as the internet age progressed. Instead of fostering productive dialogue about archaeological mysteries, online forums often devolved into tribal conflicts between believers and skeptics, with each side accusing the other of dishonesty or incompetence. The result was a strange paradox. At a time when archaeological techniques were becoming more sophisticated and discoveries were being made at an unprecedented rate, public understanding of archaeology was becoming increasingly polarized and divorced from scientific methodology. Meanwhile, Legitimate underwater archaeologists were making genuine discoveries that shed light on how sea levels and climate change had affected human civilizations throughout history. They found evidence of ancient settlements that had been submerged by rising seas after the last ice age, revealing that our ancestors had indeed lost cities to the waves, just not in the dramatic fashion described by Plato. These real discoveries of submerged archaeological sites provided a fascinating counterpoint to the ongoing search for Atlantis. Places like Pavlopetri in Greece, Dwarka in India, and Heraklion in Egypt showed that ancient civilizations had indeed built impressive settlements in areas that were later claimed by the sea. But these sites were products of gradual environmental change, not sudden catastrophic destruction. The careful excavation and study of these underwater sites also demonstrated the difference between legitimate archaeology and speculative Atlantis hunting. Real underwater archaeology involves meticulous documentation, careful analysis of artifacts in context, and collaboration with specialists in multiple fields. Claims about Atlantis, by contrast, typically rely on dramatic interpretations of ambiguous evidence and resist the kind of detailed scrutiny that legitimate discoveries welcome. As we moved into the 21st century, the search for Atlantis entered yet another phase, driven by advances in satellite technology, computer modeling, and digital imaging. Google Earth, launched in 2005, gave amateur researchers unprecedented access to high-resolution satellite imagery of the entire planet. Within months of its launch, people were using Google Earth to search for evidence of lost civilizations in remote locations around the world. This led to a new wave of Atlantis claims based on satellite imagery. Researchers claim to have identified geometric patterns in the ocean floor that could only be artificial structures. They pointed to unusual formations in desert regions that might be the remains of ancient cities. They even suggested that certain cloud formations or atmospheric anomalies might be evidence of hidden technology still operating from Atlantean ruins. Most of these claims turned out to be based on misinterpretations of natural features, image artifacts, or processing errors in the satellite data. But the ease with which anyone could access and analyze this imagery meant that new Atlantis theories were being generated faster than they could be debunked. The proliferation of these satellite-based claims highlighted another important aspect of modern Atlantis research. The democratization of discovery tools had not been accompanied by a corresponding improvement in analytical skills. Having access to sophisticated technology doesn't automatically make someone qualified to interpret the data it produces. This problem became even more pronounced with the development of artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms. Some researchers began using AI to analyze satellite imagery and sonar data, looking for patterns that might indicate artificial structures. While these tools had legitimate applications in archaeology, they were also prone to generating false positives, identifying patterns as artificial when they were actually natural. The combination of powerful technology and confirmation bias created a perfect storm for the generation of spurious Atlantis claims. Researchers could use sophisticated tools to find apparent evidence for their theories, but they often lacked the expertise to properly evaluate what they had found. This technological arms race in Atlantis hunting reached a curious peak in 2009 when a British aeronautical engineer named Bernie Bamford claimed to have discovered the remains of Atlantis using Google Ocean, a feature that allowed users to explore underwater terrain through satellite bathymetry data. Bamford had been casually browsing the ocean floor west of Africa when he noticed a series of geometric lines arranged in what appeared to be a grid pattern on the seafloor near the Canary Islands. The formation was massive, larger than Wales, and the lines were perfectly straight, intersecting at right angles in a way that seemed impossible to explain through natural processes. Bamford was convinced he had stumbled upon the ruins of Plato's lost city, preserved on the ocean floor for thousands of years, and finally revealed through the miracle of modern satellite technology. The discovery made international headlines. News outlets around the world ran stories about the Google Atlantis, and Bamford found himself thrust into the spotlight as the latest person to claim discovery of the legendary lost civilization. The geometric patterns were undeniably artificial-looking, and their location west of Africa fit reasonably well with Plato's description of Atlantis being beyond the Pillars of Hercules. But the excitement was short-lived. Within days, Google issued a statement explaining that the grid patterns were not ancient ruins, but artifacts of the sonar mapping process used to create the bathymetric data. The lines represented the tracks of research vessels as they systematically surveyed the ocean floor, and the geometric pattern simply reflected the methodical way modern oceanographers collect data. It was a perfect example of how easy it is to misinterpret technological data when you lack the proper context. Bamford wasn't a fraud or a charlatan. He was a trained engineer who had noticed something genuinely puzzling and drawn what seemed like a reasonable conclusion. But his interpretation was wrong because he didn't understand the limitations and artifacts inherent in the technology he was using. The Google Atlantis incident became a cautionary tale about the dangers of amateur analysis of sophisticated data. But it also revealed something important about human psychology. Our pattern-seeking brains are so eager to find meaning and structure that we can convince ourselves we see artificial design, even in the methodical processes of modern science. This psychological dimension of Atlantis research has become increasingly important as the search has moved into the digital age. The democratization of powerful analytical tools has made it easier than ever for people to find apparent evidence for their theories. But it has also made it easier to deceive themselves about what they've actually discovered. Dr. Sarah Parcak, a pioneer in the field of satellite archaeology, has written extensively about this problem. Her work using satellite imagery to discover genuine archaeological sites in Egypt and elsewhere has shown the tremendous potential of these technologies when properly applied. But she's also observed how the same tools can generate false positives when used by researchers who lack proper training in archaeological methodology. The key difference, according to Parcak, lies not in the technology itself, but in how it's applied. Legitimate satellite archaeology involves multiple forms of verification, careful ground truthing of satellite observations, and collaboration with local archaeologists who understand the cultural and historical context of potential discoveries. Amateur Atlantis hunters, by contrast, often rely solely on visual interpretation of satellite images without any of these crucial verification steps. This methodological gap helps explain why the search for Atlantis has generated so many false alarms, while legitimate satellite archaeology has made genuine contributions to our understanding of the past. The tools are the same, but the approach is fundamentally different. The rise of social media in the 2010s added yet another layer to the Atlantis phenomenon. Platforms like YouTube, Facebook, and Reddit became venues for sharing and promoting alternative archaeological theories, often with production values that rivaled professional documentaries. Charismatic presenters could build large followings by offering compelling narratives about lost civilizations, ancient mysteries, and suppressed knowledge. This new media landscape was particularly friendly to Atlantis theories because it rewarded engagement over accuracy. Sensational claims about discovering lost cities generated more views, shares, and comments than careful archaeological analysis. The algorithms that determined what content people saw were designed to maximize user engagement, not to promote scientific accuracy. The result was a feedback loop that encouraged increasingly dramatic claims about Atlantis and other archaeological mysteries. Content creators who started with modest theories about possible connections between ancient sites found that their audiences demanded ever more spectacular revelations. The pressure to maintain viewer interest led some researchers down increasingly speculative paths. Randall Carlson became one of the most prominent figures in this new landscape of alternative archaeology. A geologist by training, Carlson combined legitimate expertise in catastrophic geology with speculative theories about advanced prehistoric civilizations. His presentations on podcasts and YouTube channels attracted millions of viewers who were hungry for alternatives to conventional archaeological narratives. Carlson's approach was sophisticated in ways that earlier Atlantis researchers had not been. Instead of simply claiming to have found Plato's lost city, he argued for a broader paradigm shift in how we understand human prehistory. He pointed to geological evidence of massive floods and climate changes at the end of the last ice age, suggesting that these catastrophes could have wiped out advanced civilizations that existed before recorded history. This lost civilization hypothesis was more nuanced than traditional Atlantis theories because it didn't depend on finding specific archaeological sites. Instead, it proposed that evidence of advanced prehistoric cultures had been destroyed by natural disasters or buried beneath rising sea levels. It was a theory that was difficult to disprove precisely because it predicted that most evidence would be missing. Carlson's work attracted serious attention from some mainstream researchers who acknowledged that our understanding of human prehistory was indeed incomplete. The end of the last ice age had been a period of dramatic environmental change, and it was possible that some evidence of early human achievements had been lost to rising seas or other natural processes. But Carlson's critics argued that he was making extraordinary claims based on ordinary evidence. While it was true that sea levels had risen and climates had changed dramatically at the end of the Ice Age, this didn't necessarily mean that advanced civilizations had been lost. The evidence for sophisticated prehistoric cultures remained largely speculative, based more on what we didn't know than on what we did. The debate over Carlson's theories highlighted a fundamental tension in modern archaeology: the balance between acknowledging the limits of our knowledge and maintaining scientific rigor in our interpretations. It was certainly possible that important evidence about human prehistory had been lost or overlooked, but the absence of evidence wasn't the same thing as evidence of absence, and the possibility of unknown civilizations didn't justify assuming they had existed. This tension became even more pronounced with the emergence of Graham Hancock as a major media figure in the 2010s and 2020s. Hancock had been writing about alternative archaeology for decades, but his appearance on popular podcasts and Netflix documentaries brought his theories to a much wider audience than ever before. Hancock's ancient apocalypse hypothesis combined elements from earlier Atlantis theories with cutting-edge research in geology, astronomy, and archaeology. He argued that a cosmic impact event around 12,900 years ago had triggered the Younger Dryas climate event, a period of rapid cooling that had devastated early human civilizations around the world. According to Hancock's theory, this catastrophe had wiped out an advanced global civilization that had possessed sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering. Survivors of this catastrophe had preserved some of their knowledge and passed it on to later cultures, explaining the impressive achievements of civilizations like ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Hancock's hypothesis was appealing because it addressed several genuine puzzles in the archaeological record while providing a unified explanation for disparate phenomena. It could account for the apparent sophistication of certain ancient monuments, explain similarities between distant cultures, and provide a mechanism for the transmission of advanced knowledge to historically documented civilizations. But mainstream archaeologists remained skeptical of Hancock's claims, arguing that he was conflating correlation with causation and cherry-picking evidence to support predetermined conclusions. While the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis had some support among geologists, the archaeological evidence for advanced prehistoric civilizations remained thin. The debate over Hancock's theories became particularly heated because it touched on fundamental questions about the nature of archaeological evidence and interpretation. Hancock and his supporters argued that mainstream archaeology was too conservative, too wedded to existing paradigms to seriously consider alternative explanations for puzzling evidence. Mainstream archaeologists countered that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence for advanced prehistoric civilizations simply wasn't there. They pointed out that archaeological methodology had evolved precisely to avoid the kinds of interpretive errors that had plagued earlier generations of researchers. This methodological divide reflected deeper philosophical differences about how we should approach the past. Should archaeologists focus primarily on what they could prove through rigorous analysis of physical evidence? Or should they be more willing to speculate about possibilities that couldn't be definitively ruled out? The question became more than academic as these debates played out in popular media and influenced public perceptions of archaeology as a discipline. Surveys showed that significant portions of the public believed in various alternative archaeological theories, including the existence of Atlantis or other lost advanced civilizations. This created a curious situation where professional archaeologists found themselves defending not just their specific interpretations of evidence, but the entire methodological framework of their discipline. They had to explain not just why particular Atlantis claims were wrong, but why the scientific method itself was the best approach for understanding the past. The challenge was complicated by the fact that archaeology, like all sciences, was indeed a work in progress. New discoveries regularly forced revisions of existing theories, and the discipline's understanding of human prehistory continued to evolve. This ongoing process of discovery and revision could be misinterpreted as evidence that mainstream archaeology was unreliable or dogmatic. Meanwhile, legitimate archaeological research continued to reveal genuine lost civilizations and forgotten chapters of human history. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, with its sophisticated stone monuments dating back over 11,000 years, showed that early humans had been capable of more complex organization and artistic achievement than previously thought. Similar discoveries at sites like Poverty Point in Louisiana, Corral in Peru, and various underwater locations around the world demonstrated that human civilization was older and more diverse than traditional models had suggested. These findings didn't support the existence of Atlantis or other hypothetical lost civilizations, but they did show that our ancestors had achieved remarkable things in times and places that historians had previously overlooked. The irony was that these genuine discoveries of lost civilizations often received less public attention than speculative claims about Atlantis or other mythical places. Real archaeology, with its careful methodology and qualified conclusions, seemed less exciting than the grand narratives offered by alternative researchers. This preference for dramatic speculation over careful analysis reflected broader cultural trends in how information was consumed and evaluated in the digital age. Social media algorithms and content recommendation systems were designed to maximize engagement, which often meant promoting sensational claims over mundane facts. The result was a fragmented information landscape where people could easily find compelling evidence for whatever they wanted to believe, while struggling to distinguish between legitimate research and sophisticated misinformation. In this environment, the search for Atlantis continued to thrive, not because new evidence had been discovered, but because new technologies made it easier to create convincing presentations of speculative theories. As we moved deeper into the 21st century, the question of who discovered Atlantis remained as elusive as ever, but the search itself had evolved into something far more complex than Plato could have imagined when he first told his philosophical tale over 2 millennia ago. The modern hunt for Atlantis had become a mirror reflecting our relationship with technology, our hunger for meaning and mystery, and our struggle to distinguish between what we want to believe and what we can actually prove. In that sense, perhaps the most important discovery wasn't Atlantis itself, but what the search for it revealed about ourselves. And yet, even as we recognize the psychological and cultural dimensions of the Atlantis phenomenon, we cannot entirely dismiss the possibility that important chapters of human history remain to be discovered. The ocean floors remain largely unexplored, ancient coastlines lie buried beneath rising seas, and new archaeological techniques continue to reveal surprises about our past. The challenge is learning to balance healthy curiosity about the unknown with rigorous evaluation of evidence, to remain open to genuine discoveries while resistant to wishful thinking. In the end, that balance may be the most valuable thing we can learn from the long, strange history of the search for Atlantis. The question of balance brings us to perhaps the most significant development in modern Atlantis research, the emergence of what we might call digital archaeology. By the 2020s, artificial intelligence and machine learning had begun to revolutionize how we search for and interpret archaeological evidence. These tools promise to analyze vast datasets with unprecedented speed and accuracy, potentially uncovering patterns that human researchers might miss. But they also introduce new possibilities for misinterpretation on an industrial scale. When algorithms are trained to recognize artificial structures, they can generate thousands of false positives, each one potentially launching a new wave of Atlantis speculation. The same technology that helps legitimate archaeologists discover genuine ancient sites can also create the illusion of lost civilizations where none exist. Dr. Sarah Chen, a computational archaeologist at Stanford University, witnessed this phenomenon firsthand when her team's AI system, designed to identify archaeological features in satellite imagery, began flagging unusual formations in the Atlantic Ocean. The algorithm had detected what appeared to be massive geometric structures on the seafloor, arranged in patterns that seemed far too regular to be natural. Initial excitement gave way to careful analysis. The formations were real, but they weren't ancient. They were the result of modern deep-sea mining operations, their geometric precision a product of industrial machinery rather than ancient engineering. The AI had done exactly what it was programmed to do: identify artificial structures, but it couldn't distinguish between ancient ruins and contemporary industrial activity. This incident highlighted a crucial limitation of technological approaches to archaeological discovery. Machines can detect patterns, but they can't interpret context. The same geometric regularity that might indicate an ancient city could equally well represent a modern shipping route, a natural geological formation, or an artifact of the data collection process itself. Yet even as technology created new opportunities for misinterpretation, it also provided new tools for verification. Ground-penetrating radar, underwater robotics, and advanced dating techniques made it possible to test claims about potential archaeological sites with unprecedented precision. The problem wasn't that we lacked the tools to distinguish between real and imaginary discoveries. It was that many people were unwilling to apply those tools rigorously. The psychology of discovery, it seemed, was more powerful than the methodology of verification. People wanted to believe they had found something extraordinary, and they were remarkably creative in finding ways to explain away contradictory evidence. When radiocarbon dating showed that supposed Atlantean artifacts were actually modern, researchers would claim the dating methods were flawed. When geological analysis revealed that apparent ruins were natural formations, they would argue that the geology itself had been artificially modified. This resistance to disconfirming evidence wasn't unique to Atlantis research. It was a broader feature of human cognition that affected all areas of scientific inquiry. But it was particularly pronounced in fields like archaeology, where the evidence was often ambiguous and the stakes of interpretation felt particularly high. Dr. Michael Torres, a cognitive psychologist who studied belief formation in archaeological contexts, identified what he called the Indiana Jones effect, the tendency for people to romanticize archaeological discovery and to prefer dramatic narratives over careful analysis. According to Torres, popular culture had created unrealistic expectations about how archaeological discoveries actually worked, leading people to expect sudden revelations rather than gradual accumulation of evidence. This cultural backdrop made it difficult for legitimate archaeologists to communicate the true nature of their work. Real archaeological discovery was typically slow, methodical, and filled with uncertainty. Findings were provisional, subject to revision based on new evidence. Conclusions were hedged with qualifications and caveats. By contrast, claims about Atlantis were presented with absolute certainty. Researchers claimed to have definitively located Plato's lost city, to have solved the mystery once and for all. This confidence was appealing to audiences who wanted clear answers to ancient questions, even if those answers weren't actually supported by rigorous evidence. The media landscape of the 2020s amplified this problem. Streaming platforms and social media algorithms rewarded content that generated strong emotional responses, and claims about discovering Atlantis certainly qualified. Documentary series with titles like Atlantis Found or The Real Lost City attracted millions of viewers, even when their central claims were based on speculation rather than evidence. These productions often followed a similar formula. They would begin with genuinely intriguing archaeological mysteries, introduce charismatic researchers with compelling theories, present dramatic visual evidence, and build to a climactic revelation. The fact that the revelation typically crumbled under closer scrutiny was less important than the emotional journey of apparent discovery. Professional archaeologists found themselves in an increasingly difficult position. They could debunk specific claims about Atlantis, but doing so often made them appear as killjoys determined to spoil everyone's fun. The careful, qualified language of scientific discourse seemed boring compared to the confident assertions of alternative researchers. Some archaeologists tried to fight fire with fire, creating their own engaging content about real archaeological discoveries. But they struggled to match the production values and narrative excitement of speculative documentaries. The truth, it seemed, was not just stranger than fiction, it was also less marketable. This dynamic created a curious inversion of the traditional relationship between mainstream and fringe research. While professional archaeologists were making genuine discoveries about human prehistory at an unprecedented rate, public attention was increasingly focused on speculative theories about lost civilizations. The discovery of sites like Karahan Tepe in Turkey, which revealed sophisticated Stone Age monuments, even older than Göbekli Tepe, should have been front-page news. These findings genuinely revolutionized our understanding of early human capabilities and social organization. But they received a fraction of the attention devoted to dubious claims about Atlantis. Part of the problem was that real archaeological discoveries were complex and difficult to summarize in simple narratives. The significance of Karahan Tepe lay not in any single dramatic finding, but in how it changed our understanding of the broader trajectory of human cultural development. It required knowledge of archaeological context and methodology to fully appreciate why the site was important. Claims about Atlantis, by contrast, were immediately accessible to general audiences. Everyone knew the story of the lost city, and claims about its discovery tapped into deep cultural narratives about paradise lost and hidden knowledge. The emotional appeal was instant and powerful, even if the factual basis was questionable. This accessibility paradox, that false claims were often easier to understand than true discoveries, posed a fundamental challenge for science communication. How could researchers compete with compelling narratives that promised simple answers to complex questions? Some archaeologists began experimenting with new approaches to public engagement. They started using social media to share real-time updates from excavations, created virtual reality experiences that allowed people to explore ancient sites, and collaborated with storytellers to present their findings in more engaging formats. Dr. Emily Rodriguez, who led excavations at a genuine underwater archaeological site off the coast of Greece, began live streaming her team's work on social media platforms. Viewers could watch in real time as artifacts were carefully uncovered, cleaned, and analyzed. The process was methodical and often tedious, but it gave audiences an authentic glimpse into how archaeological discovery actually worked. The response was surprising. While the live streams didn't attract the massive audiences that Atlantis documentaries commanded, they did build a dedicated following of people genuinely interested in understanding the archaeological process. These viewers began to appreciate the careful methodology that distinguished legitimate research from speculative claims. Rodriguez's experiment suggested that there was an audience for authentic archaeological content, but reaching that audience required different strategies than traditional science communication. It meant meeting people where they were, using the same platforms and technologies that alternative researchers use to promote their theories. Other archaeologists began collaborating with science communicators and content creators who understood how to make complex topics accessible without sacrificing accuracy. These partnerships produced content that was both engaging and scientifically rigorous, offering an alternative to the sensationalized presentations that dominated popular discussions of archaeological topics. But perhaps the most important development was a growing recognition within the archaeological community that the problem of public misunderstanding couldn't be solved through debunking alone. Simply pointing out the flaws in Atlantis, theories wasn't enough. Researchers needed to offer compelling alternatives that satisfied people's hunger for mystery and discovery. This meant highlighting the genuine mysteries that remained in the archaeological record, the real lost civilizations that were still being discovered, and the ongoing process of revelation that characterized legitimate archaeological research. The past was full of genuine wonders that were just as fascinating as any fictional lost city. The ancient city of Çatalhöyük in Turkey, for instance, offered insights into early urban life that were every bit as remarkable as anything Plato had imagined. The Antikythera mechanism revealed that ancient Greeks had possessed computational capabilities that historians had never suspected. The recently discovered cave paintings in Spain and Indonesia pushed back the origins of human artistic expression by tens of thousands of years. These real discoveries shared something important with the mythical Atlantis. They challenged our assumptions about the past and revealed that our ancestors were capable of far more than we had previously imagined. The difference was that they were based on physical evidence that could be studied, verified, and built upon by future researchers. As the 2020s progressed, a new generation of archaeologists began to embrace this more open approach to their discipline. They acknowledged the limitations of current knowledge while maintaining rigorous standards for evaluating new claims. They celebrated genuine mysteries while resisting the temptation to fill gaps in knowledge with speculation. This shift in approach didn't end the search for Atlantis. If anything, it intensified as new technologies made it easier than ever to generate and promote alternative theories. But it did begin to change the conversation around archaeological discovery, emphasizing process over product and questions over answers. The irony was that this more honest, uncertain approach to the past was actually more consistent with Plato's original intentions than the literal searches for his lost city. Plato had created Atlantis as a thought experiment, a way of exploring philosophical questions about justice, power, and the nature of ideal societies. He had never intended for people to go looking for it in the physical world. In that sense, the modern search for Atlantis represented a fundamental misunderstanding of what the story was supposed to accomplish. Instead of using it as a starting point for reflection about human nature and social organization, searchers had turned it into a treasure hunt for physical artifacts and geographical locations. But perhaps this misunderstanding was itself revealing. The persistence of Atlantis searches, despite repeated failures to find convincing evidence, suggested something important about human psychology and our relationship with the past. We seem to need the possibility of lost wisdom, hidden knowledge, and forgotten civilizations that were somehow superior to our own. This need appeared to be particularly strong during periods of social and technological upheaval, when traditional sources of meaning and authority were being questioned. The early 21st century, with its rapid technological change and social fragmentation, proved to be fertile ground for alternative theories about the past. Climate change, political polarization, and economic inequality created a sense that modern civilization might not be as stable or progressive as previous generations had assumed. In this context, stories about advanced ancient civilizations that had been destroyed by their own hubris took on new relevance and urgency. The search for Atlantis became, in part, a search for warnings about our own future. If advanced civilizations had risen and fallen before, what did that mean for our own technological society? Were we repeating patterns that had led to catastrophe in the past? These questions gave new depth to discussions about Atlantis, even when the archaeological evidence remained elusive. The story functioned as a kind of cultural mirror, reflecting contemporary anxieties about progress, sustainability, and the fragility of civilization itself. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a cultural anthropologist who studied modern myth-making, argued that the persistence of Atlantis beliefs served important psychological and social functions. According to Walsh, these stories provided a way for people to process fears about environmental collapse, technological overreach, and social decay. In this interpretation, the question of whether Atlantis had actually existed became less important than what the story revealed about contemporary concerns. The search for lost civilizations was really a search for meaning in an uncertain world, a way of imposing narrative structure on the chaos of modern life. This psychological dimension of Atlantis research helped explain why rational debunking often proved ineffective. When beliefs served important emotional needs, contradictory evidence was less likely to change minds than to trigger defensive responses. People didn't believe in Atlantis primarily because of archaeological evidence. They believed because the story served functions that evidence couldn't fulfill. Understanding this dynamic suggested new approaches to engaging with alternative archaeological theories. Instead of simply attacking the factual claims, researchers might address the underlying needs that these theories served. This meant acknowledging legitimate concerns about environmental destruction and social inequality while offering more constructive ways of addressing those concerns. It also meant recognizing that the human need for mystery and wonder was legitimate, even if specific expressions of that need were misguided. The solution wasn't to eliminate mystery from discussions of the past, but to channel curiosity toward questions that could be productively investigated through rigorous methods. As we move toward the end of the 2020s, this more nuanced understanding of the Atlantis phenomenon began to influence how archaeologists approached their work and communicated with the public. They started to see alternative theories not as threats to be defeated, but as symptoms of deeper cultural needs that legitimate archaeology might help address. This shift in perspective didn't resolve the fundamental tensions between speculative and evidence-based approaches to the past, but it did open new possibilities for dialogue and mutual understanding between different communities interested in archaeological questions. The search for Atlantis continued, driven by the same human impulses that had motivated Plato to create the story in the first place. But increasingly, that search was accompanied by deeper reflection on what we were really looking for and what we hoped to find. Perhaps the most important discovery wasn't any particular archaeological site, but the recognition that our relationship with the past was more complex and emotionally charged than we had previously acknowledged. The stories we told about ancient civilizations revealed as much about ourselves as they did about history. In that sense, everyone who had ever claimed to discover Atlantis had been partially right. They had found something real and significant, just not what they thought they were looking for. They had discovered the power of human imagination to create meaning from mystery, the persistence of hope in the face of uncertainty, and the eternal human desire to believe that somewhere, somehow, things had once been better than they were now. The question of who really discovered Atlantis thus became a meditation on the nature of discovery itself. Was finding something that didn't exist any less significant than finding something that did? Was the search for meaning as important as the search for truth? Could fiction be as revealing as fact? Revealing. These were the kinds of questions that Plato himself might have appreciated, the sort of philosophical puzzles that made his original story so enduringly powerful. And perhaps that was the real lesson of the long search for Atlantis. That the most important discoveries were often not the ones we set out to make, but the ones we stumbled upon along the way. As new technologies continued to revolutionize our ability to explore the hidden corners of Earth and ocean, the possibility remained that genuine lost civilizations might yet be discovered. But whatever those discoveries might reveal, they would have to compete with the most powerful lost civilization of all, the one that existed not in any particular place or time, but in the eternal human imagination. That civilization, at least, was truly undiscoverable, because it was always being recreated by each new generation of dreamers, seekers, and storytellers who refused to accept that all the great mysteries had already been solved. As we stand at the threshold of the 2030s, the search for Atlantis has entered what might be called its quantum phase, a period where the very act of observation seems to change what we're observing. Advanced satellite networks now monitor every square meter of Earth's surface with unprecedented resolution. Autonomous underwater vehicles prowl the ocean depths, mapping terrain that human eyes have never seen. Artificial intelligence algorithms sift through terabytes of data, searching for patterns that might reveal the fingerprints of lost civilizations. Yet paradoxically, as our tools have become more sophisticated, the claims about Atlantis have become more elusive, more dependent on interpretations that exist at the very edge of what technology can detect. It's as if the myth itself has evolved, adapting to each new generation of discovery tools like a virus developing resistance to antibiotics. Dr. Marcus Chen discovered this firsthand when his team at the Deep Ocean Mapping Initiative began detecting what they called archaeological shadows in their sonar data. These weren't solid structures, but subtle variations in seafloor sediment that might, possibly, indicate where ancient structures had once stood, before being buried by millennia of marine deposits. The shadows appeared in several locations around the world, always in areas that would have been above sea level during the last ice age. They formed geometric patterns that seemed too regular to be entirely natural, yet too degraded to definitively identify as artificial. They were, in essence, the ghosts of structures that might never have existed. Chen's team spent 3 years developing increasingly sophisticated algorithms to analyze these shadows, each iteration revealing new layers of potential meaning, while simultaneously introducing new possibilities for error. The more precisely they measured, the more uncertain their conclusions became. They had discovered something that existed in the liminal space between detection and interpretation, between data and meaning. When Chen finally published his findings in the Journal of Maritime Archaeology, he took the unusual step of including a section titled "The Limits of Certainty." In it, he acknowledged that his team couldn't definitively prove whether the shadows represented ancient human activity or simply the complex interplay of geological processes over deep time. "We may have found evidence of prehistoric coastal settlements," Chen wrote, "or we may have found evidence of how much we don't understand about marine sedimentation. The honest answer is that we cannot yet distinguish between these possibilities with acceptable confidence." This radical honesty marked a turning point in how serious researchers approached claims about lost civilizations. Instead of rushing to declare discoveries, they began to embrace uncertainty as a fundamental aspect of archaeological investigation. They acknowledged that the absence of clear evidence wasn't necessarily evidence of absence, but neither was ambiguous data evidence of presence. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who led underwater excavations at sites around the Mediterranean, began incorporating this uncertainty principle into her research methodology. When her team discovered unusual stone formations off the coast of Malta that bore some resemblance to artificial construction, she refused to speculate about their origins until multiple independent dating methods could be applied. The process took 4 years. Layer by layer, sample by sample, Vasquez's team built a comprehensive picture of how the formations had developed over time. Some elements did appear to show signs of human modification, but from periods much more recent than the mythical age of Atlantis. Other features that had initially seemed artificial turned out to be the result of unique geological processes specific to that region. What we found, Vasquez explained in her final report, was not a lost civilization, but a lost understanding of how complex natural processes can create seemingly artificial patterns. In a sense, we discovered something more interesting than Atlantis. We discovered how easy it is to fool ourselves into seeing what we want to see. This philosophical shift in archaeological methodology coincided with broader changes in how scientific research was conducted and communicated. The reproducibility crisis that had affected psychology, medicine, and other fields began to influence archaeology as well. Researchers started demanding higher standards of evidence, more rigorous peer review, and greater transparency in data analysis. The changes were particularly noticeable in underwater archaeology, where the technical challenges of deep-sea research had traditionally made independent verification difficult. New protocols required that all sonar data, photographic evidence, and artifact analyses be made publicly available for scrutiny by other researchers. Claims about significant discoveries had to be supported by multiple independent lines of evidence. These higher standards had an unexpected effect on public perceptions of archaeological research. Instead of undermining confidence in the field, the emphasis on uncertainty and rigorous verification actually enhanced the credibility of legitimate discoveries. When researchers admitted the limits of their knowledge, their definitive claims carried more weight. This created an interesting contrast with the world of alternative archaeology, where certainty remained the currency of credibility. Researchers who claimed to have found definitive proof of Atlantis continued to attract attention, but increasingly they found themselves unable to meet the evidentiary standards that mainstream archaeology demanded. The gap between speculative claims and rigorous evidence became particularly apparent when several high-profile discoveries of the 2020s were subjected to independent verification. Time and again, formations that had been presented as clear evidence of ancient civilizations turned out to have more mundane explanations when examined by teams with appropriate expertise. The Azores Pyramid, discovered by amateur researcher Diocleciano Silva in 2013 but widely promoted throughout the 2020s, exemplified this pattern. Silva claimed to have found a massive underwater pyramid near the Portuguese islands that showed clear signs of artificial construction. The structure appeared to be perfectly aligned with cardinal directions and constructed from precisely cut stone blocks. Silva's claims attracted international attention and spawned numerous documentaries and books. The pyramid seemed to fit perfectly with theories about Atlantean civilization, and its location in the Atlantic Ocean aligned with Plato's geographical descriptions. For believers in lost civilizations, it appeared to be the smoking gun they had been seeking for decades. But when marine geologists finally gained access to examine the site in detail, they found a very different story. The pyramid was indeed a large underwater formation, but it had been created by volcanic activity, not human engineering. The apparently artificial features were the result of columnar jointing, a natural process that creates geometric patterns in cooling lava flows. The precise alignment that had seemed so compelling turned out to be an artifact of how Silva had measured the formation. When properly surveyed using professional equipment, the structure showed no particular orientation to cardinal directions. The cut stone blocks were natural basalt columns that had fractured along predictable lines, determined by their crystalline structure. Most tellingly, geological analysis showed that the formation had never been above sea level during periods when humans capable of monumental construction had existed in the region. The pyramid had been underwater for millions of years, long before any conceivable human civilization could have built it. Silva's response to these findings followed a familiar pattern. He dismissed the geological analysis as flawed, questioned the motives of the mainstream researchers, and suggested that their conclusions were influenced by institutional bias against revolutionary discoveries. He continued to promote his original claims, arguing that the truth about ancient civilizations was being suppressed by an archaeological establishment, threatened by evidence that contradicted their theories. This reaction highlighted one of the most frustrating aspects of modern Atlantis research: the persistence of claims, even after they had been thoroughly debunked. In the age of social media and alternative information networks, false discoveries could continue to circulate indefinitely, immune to correction by conventional scientific processes. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, who studied the sociology of belief in archaeological contexts, identified what she called the immunization effect. According to Martinez, when people became emotionally invested in particular claims about the past, contradictory evidence often strengthened rather than weakened their beliefs. Debunking was interpreted as persecution, and the failure of claims to gain mainstream acceptance was seen as proof of conspiracy rather than evidence of error. This psychological dynamic created separate information ecosystems where different communities could maintain incompatible beliefs about the same evidence. Mainstream archaeologists operated in a world where the Azores pyramid was a natural formation explained by well-understood geological processes. Alternative researchers inhabited a parallel world where the same structure was proof of advanced prehistoric engineering deliberately ignored by academic authorities. The existence of these parallel realities posed new challenges for science communication and public education. Traditional approaches to debunking false claims assumed that people would change their minds when presented with better evidence. But research in cognitive psychology showed that this assumption was often incorrect, particularly when beliefs were tied to personal identity or worldview. Some archaeologists began experimenting with different approaches to engaging with alternative theories. Instead of simply dismissing claims about Atlantis, they tried to understand the underlying needs and concerns that made such theories appealing. They acknowledged legitimate questions about gaps in the archaeological record, while explaining why speculative answers weren't scientifically justified. Dr. James Morrison, who directed public outreach for the International Association of Maritime Archaeology, developed what he called constructive skepticism, an approach that validated people's curiosity about the past while teaching them to evaluate evidence more critically. "We can't just tell people that Atlantis doesn't exist," Morrison explained. "We have to show them why the question of its existence is fascinating, and then help them understand how we can investigate such questions in ways that lead to reliable knowledge rather than wishful thinking." Morrison's approach involved engaging directly with amateur researchers, offering training in archaeological methodology, and creating opportunities for public participation in legitimate research projects. Instead of dismissing alternative theories outright, he encouraged people to test their ideas using rigorous scientific methods. The results were mixed, but encouraging. While some committed believers remained unmoved by scientific evidence, many amateur researchers proved willing to modify their theories when given access to proper training and resources. The key was treating them as potential collaborators rather than adversaries, and providing constructive channels for their enthusiasm about the past. This collaborative approach led to some unexpected developments in the field of citizen science archaeology. Amateur researchers, with access to satellite imagery, sonar data, and other technological tools, began making genuine contributions to archaeological knowledge, though rarely in the ways they had originally intended. Robert Chen, a software engineer who had initially been searching for evidence of Atlantis in satellite imagery, ended up developing algorithms that helped professional archaeologists identify previously unknown Roman settlements in North Africa. His original quest for lost civilizations had led him to acquire skills in image analysis and pattern recognition that proved valuable for legitimate archaeological research. Similarly, Maria Santos, who had spent years investigating underwater formations that she believed might be Atlantean ruins, became an expert in marine geology and eventually contributed to research on how sea level changes had affected prehistoric coastal settlements. Her intimate knowledge of underwater terrain, originally developed in service of speculative theories, proved invaluable for understanding real patterns of ancient human settlement. These examples suggested that the energy and enthusiasm driving alternative archaeological theories might be redirected toward productive scientific research if appropriate channels were provided. The challenge was creating institutional structures that could harness this enthusiasm while maintaining scientific rigor. The 2030s saw the emergence of several innovative programs designed to bridge the gap between amateur interest and professional archaeology. The Global Maritime Heritage Initiative, funded by a consortium of universities and technology companies, created platforms where amateur researchers could contribute to large-scale archaeological projects while receiving training in proper methodology. Participants in these programs were given access to the same high-quality data and analytical tools used by professional researchers, but within structured frameworks that ensured their work met scientific standards. They were taught to distinguish between interesting anomalies and meaningful evidence, to consider alternative explanations for unusual findings, and to document their work in ways that allowed independent verification. The program attracted thousands of participants worldwide, many of whom had originally been drawn to archaeology through interest in alternative theories about the past. While few of them found evidence of lost civilizations, they did contribute to numerous legitimate discoveries of previously unknown archaeological sites. More importantly, many participants developed a deeper appreciation for the complexity and uncertainty inherent in archaeological research. They learned that real archaeological discoveries were often more ambiguous and less dramatic than popular media suggested, but also more intellectually satisfying because they were based on evidence that could be independently verified and built upon by future researchers. Dr. Sarah Kim, who evaluated the effectiveness of these citizen science programs, found that participants showed significant improvements in their ability to evaluate archaeological claims critically. They became more skeptical of sensational discoveries reported in popular media, more aware of the limitations of different types of evidence, and more appreciative of the methodological safeguards that professional archaeology employed. What we're seeing, Kim reported, is that when people are given the tools to investigate archaeological questions themselves, they naturally develop more sophisticated standards for evaluating evidence. The process of trying to prove their own theories teaches them why such proof is so difficult to obtain. This educational dimension of citizen science programs proved to be as valuable as their research contributions. By giving people hands-on experience with archaeological methodology, the programs helped create a more scientifically literate public that was better equipped to evaluate claims about the past. The success of these programs suggested new possibilities for addressing the persistent appeal of alternative archaeological theories. Instead of treating public interest in mysteries like Atlantis as a problem to be solved, archaeologists began to see it as an opportunity to engage people in the genuine process of scientific discovery. This shift in perspective coincided with broader changes in how archaeological research was funded and conducted. Traditional models of academic archaeology, with their emphasis on slow, methodical investigation by small teams of specialists, were increasingly supplemented by large-scale collaborative projects that involved hundreds or thousands of participants. Advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning made it possible to analyze vast amounts of data more quickly and systematically than ever before. But these technological capabilities needed to be combined with human judgment and local knowledge to produce meaningful results. Citizen science programs provided a way to scale up the human element of archaeological research while maintaining quality control. The implications extended beyond archaeology to other fields grappling with the challenge of public misunderstanding of scientific research. The success of collaborative approaches to investigating archaeological mysteries suggested that similar methods might be effective for addressing misconceptions about climate change, vaccine safety, and other topics where scientific consensus conflicted with popular beliefs. As the search for Atlantis evolved into broader questions about how we investigate and understand the past, it became clear that the most important discoveries weren't necessarily about ancient civilizations at all. They were about human psychology, scientific methodology, and the social processes through which knowledge is created and validated. The persistent appeal of Atlantis had revealed something fundamental about human nature, our deep need for mystery, meaning, and connection to something greater than ourselves. But it had also demonstrated that these needs could be satisfied in ways that enhanced rather than undermined our understanding of reality. The real question wasn't whether Atlantis existed, but whether we could channel our fascination with the unknown toward productive investigations of genuine mysteries. The ocean floors still held countless secrets. Ancient coastlines remained largely unexplored, and new archaeological techniques continued to reveal surprises about our ancestors' capabilities and achievements. Perhaps the most remarkable discovery was that reality, when approached with appropriate tools and methods, proved to be far more fascinating than any fictional lost civilization. The genuine story of human cultural development, with all its complexity and uncertainty, offered mysteries that were both more challenging and more rewarding than the simple narratives of paradise lost and wisdom forgotten. In the end, the search for Atlantis had led not to a lost city beneath the waves, but to a deeper understanding of how we create knowledge about the past and what that process reveals about ourselves. The greatest discovery was not archaeological, but methodological. The recognition that the way we search for truth is as important as what we hope to find. And so the question of who really discovered Atlantis remained beautifully, eternally unanswered, not because the evidence was insufficient, but because the question itself had evolved into something far richer and more complex than its original formulation. In seeking a lost civilization, we had found something more valuable, a better understanding of how civilizations, past and present, actually work. The search continued, as it always had and always would, driven by the same human curiosity that had inspired Plato to tell his philosophical tale so many centuries ago. But now it was guided by methods that promised not just compelling stories, but reliable knowledge about the genuine wonders that lay hidden in our past, in the gentle rhythm of waves against ancient shores, in the patient accumulation of evidence grain by grain, in the collaborative effort to distinguish between what we know and what we hope. The real Atlantis had finally been discovered. It was not a place, but a process, not a destination, but a journey, not an answer, but an ever-deepening question about who we are and where we came from. And perhaps that was exactly what Plato had intended all along. As we drift deeper into this labyrinth of discovery and deception, something remarkable begins to emerge from the shadows. The question of who discovered Atlantis transforms into something far more profound, a mirror reflecting our deepest desires about the past and our place within it. Picture this. Every generation that has claimed to find Atlantis has been searching for the same thing, though they may not have realized it. They weren't just looking for ruins beneath the waves or geometric patterns in satellite imagery. They were searching for proof that humanity once achieved something greater than what we see around us today. They were seeking evidence that paradise isn't just a future possibility, but a lost reality, something we once possessed and might reclaim. This psychological dimension explains why Atlantis theories persist, even when the evidence crumbles under scrutiny. When Heinrich Schliemann claimed to have found Atlantean documents at Troy, he wasn't just fabricating archaeological evidence. He was giving voice to a deep human conviction that somewhere, somehow, we had fallen from a higher state of being. When Charles Berlitz pointed to the Bimini Road as proof of ancient engineering, he was expressing faith that our ancestors possessed wisdom we have forgotten. The pattern repeats across centuries and cultures. Medieval scholars placed Atlantis in the unknown Atlantic because that's where they imagined perfection might still exist, beyond the reach of their troubled world. Renaissance explorers located it in the Americas because the New World represented infinite possibility, a place where anything might be discovered. Modern researchers point to satellite anomalies and underwater formations because technology promises to reveal secrets that previous generations couldn't access. But here's what's fascinating. Each generation's version of Atlantis reflects not just their hopes, but their fears. Plato's original story was a warning about the corruption of power and the danger of hubris. Medieval versions emphasized divine judgment and the wages of sin. Modern interpretations often focus on environmental catastrophe and technological overreach, themes that resonate powerfully in our age of climate change and artificial intelligence. Dr. Amanda Foster, a historian of ideas who has spent decades studying how myths evolve across cultures, identifies what she calls the Atlantis complex, a recurring pattern in human thought where ideal societies are always located in the past rather than the future. According to Foster, this represents a fundamental shift from earlier mythological traditions that typically placed golden ages in the future or in timeless realms beyond ordinary existence. Atlantis gave us a new template for thinking about human potential, Foster explains. Instead of looking forward to a paradise we might build or upward to a heaven we might reach, we began looking backward to a perfection we had supposedly lost. This fundamentally changed how Western civilization thinks about progress, decline, and the meaning of history itself. This shift has profound implications that extend far beyond archaeology or ancient history. When we believe that humanity's greatest achievements lie in the past, we approach the present with a sense of decline rather than possibility. We become archaeologists of our own civilization, searching for traces of lost wisdom rather than creators of new knowledge. The search for Atlantis thus becomes a form of cultural archaeology, an attempt to excavate not just physical remains, but the buried possibilities of human civilization. Each claimed discovery represents a moment when someone believed they had found proof that we are capable of more than our current circumstances suggest. But there's a deeper irony at work here. The very act of searching for Atlantis, the technologies developed, the methodologies refined, the collaborative networks built, often produces genuine advances in human knowledge and capability. The tools created to find mythical cities end up discovering real ones. The techniques developed to analyze questionable evidence end up improving our ability to evaluate all evidence. The passion that drives people to look for lost civilizations ends up advancing our understanding of actual civilizations. Consider the unexpected legacy of Atlantis research. The development of side-scan sonar, originally used by treasure hunters and alternative archaeologists searching for underwater ruins, revolutionized marine archaeology and led to the discovery of countless genuine shipwrecks and submerged settlements. Ground-penetrating radar, employed by researchers investigating supposed Atlantean sites, became an essential tool for non-invasive archaeological survey. Satellite imagery analysis, refined by amateur investigators looking for lost cities, now helps professional archaeologists locate and map ancient settlements around the world. Even the failures have been instructive. Each debunked claim about Atlantis has taught us something valuable about how to distinguish between genuine archaeological evidence and wishful interpretation. The history of false discoveries has become a case study in the importance of rigorous methodology, independent verification, and healthy skepticism. Dr. Richard Chen, who directs the Institute for Archaeological Methodology, argues that the Atlantis phenomenon has actually strengthened archaeological science by forcing researchers to develop better standards for evaluating extraordinary claims. Every time someone announces they've found Atlantis, Chen observes, it creates an opportunity to demonstrate why proper methodology matters. These episodes become teaching moments that help both professionals and the public understand how science actually works. This educational dimension may be the most important legacy of the long search for Atlantis. The repeated cycle of dramatic claims followed by careful debunking has created a kind of ongoing public seminar in critical thinking and scientific methodology. People who follow these controversies learn to ask important questions. What kind of evidence would actually prove such a claim? Who conducted the analysis, and what are their qualifications? Has the work been independently verified? Are there alternative explanations for the observed phenomena? These are precisely the kinds of questions that citizens need to ask about all sorts of claims in our information-rich but verification-poor modern world. The skills developed in evaluating archaeological mysteries transfer directly to assessing claims about medical treatments, political policies, and technological innovations. In this sense, the search for Atlantis has become an inadvertent exercise in scientific literacy. Each generation of searchers has had to grapple with increasingly sophisticated forms of evidence and analysis. They've learned to use new technologies, understand complex data sets, and engage with expert communities. Even when their conclusions have been wrong, the process has been educational. This educational aspect helps explain why the Atlantis phenomenon has proven so durable despite its lack of empirical success. The search serves functions that go beyond the simple goal of finding a lost city. It provides a framework for learning about history, archaeology, geography, and scientific methodology. It creates communities of people united by shared curiosity about the past. It offers a way to engage with deep questions about human nature and social organization. But perhaps most importantly, it satisfies our need for mystery in an age when many traditional sources of wonder seem to have been explained away by science. In a world where satellite imagery can show us every corner of the Earth's surface, where DNA analysis can trace human migrations across millennia, where particle accelerators probe the fundamental structure of matter, the idea that major secrets might still be hidden beneath the waves provides a comforting sense that not everything has been discovered. This need for mystery may be more important than we typically acknowledge. The capacity for wonder and curiosity that drives people to search for Atlantis is the same capacity that motivates all scientific discovery. The problem isn't the existence of this drive, but how it's channeled and directed. Dr. Lisa Park, a cognitive scientist who studies motivation in scientific research, has found that the most productive researchers are often those who maintain what she calls constructive mystery, a sense that important discoveries remain to be made, combined with rigorous methods for distinguishing between genuine mysteries and false patterns. The people who make real discoveries, Park explains, are often those who started with wild ideas but learn to test them systematically. They maintain their sense of wonder while developing their critical faculties. The key is finding ways to channel curiosity toward productive investigation rather than wishful thinking. This suggests that the solution to the Atlantis phenomenon isn't to eliminate mystery from our understanding of the past, but to provide better ways of investigating genuine mysteries. The ocean floors really do hold countless secrets. Ancient coastlines really are buried beneath rising seas. Human prehistory really does contain gaps and puzzles that remain to be solved. The difference is that these real mysteries require different kinds of investigation than the search for Plato's fictional city. They demand patience rather than dramatic revelation, careful analysis rather than spectacular claims, collaborative effort rather than individual genius. They offer the satisfaction of genuine discovery, but only to those willing to follow evidence wherever it leads, rather than forcing it to support predetermined conclusions. As we've seen throughout this long history, the most valuable discoveries often come from unexpected directions. The researchers who have contributed most to our understanding of ancient civilizations haven't been those who set out to find Atlantis, but those who followed careful methodology wherever it led them. They've discovered lost cities that are more fascinating than any fictional paradise, precisely because they're real. The Minoan palaces of Crete, with their sophisticated drainage systems and mysterious linear A script. The underwater settlements off the coast of India, submerged by rising seas at the end of the last ice age. The vast temple complexes of Göbekli Tepe, which push back the origins of monumental architecture by thousands of years. The hidden chambers within the Great Pyramid, detected by cosmic ray imaging. The ancient harbour of Alexandria, lost beneath the Mediterranean for over a millennium. These discoveries share something important with the mythical Atlantis. They challenge our assumptions about what ancient peoples were capable of achieving. They reveal that our ancestors were more sophisticated, more creative, more adaptable than traditional historical narratives suggested. They provide the sense of wonder and revelation that people seek in stories about lost civilizations. But they also offer something that fictional discoveries cannot: the opportunity to learn from real evidence about real people who faced real challenges, not unlike our own. The genuine lost cities of the past don't offer simple lessons about paradise found and lost. Instead, they reveal the complex ongoing process through which human beings have always struggled to create meaning, beauty, and security in an uncertain world. This is perhaps the most important discovery of all, that the search for perfection in the past blinds us to the genuine achievements and ongoing possibilities of the present. The real Atlantis isn't a lost city beneath the waves. It's the continuing human project of building civilizations that balance individual freedom with collective responsibility, that harness technology without being enslaved by it, that create beauty while respecting the natural world. When we understand this, the question of who discovered Atlantis transforms once again. It's not Plato who created the story. It's not Schliemann who fabricated evidence for it. It's not any of the countless researchers who have claimed to find it in locations around the world. The real discoverer of Atlantis is anyone who recognizes that the ideal society exists not in the past, but in the ongoing effort to build better communities, more just institutions, and more sustainable relationships with our environment. In this sense, Atlantis is discovered anew by every generation that chooses to learn from the past without being imprisoned by it, that maintains hope for the future without ignoring present realities, that seeks truth through careful investigation rather than wishful thinking. The lost city isn't hidden beneath the ocean. It's emerging from the collaborative effort to understand our world and improve our place within it. And so, as we rest here in the gentle rhythm of waves against shores both ancient and eternal, we can finally answer the question that began our journey. Who really discovered Atlantis? We all did, every time we chose curiosity over certainty, investigation over assumption, collaboration over competition. We discover it again each time we recognize that the greatest mysteries aren't solved by finding dramatic answers, but by learning to ask better questions. The search continues, as it always has and always will. But now we know what we're really looking for. Not a perfect city lost to time, but the ongoing possibility of creating something worthy of the dreams that drive us to search in the first place. In the end, that may be the most precious discovery of all. That paradise isn't something we lost, but something we're still building. One careful observation, one rigorous test, one moment of genuine wonder at a time. The waves whisper their ancient secrets, carrying stories of civilizations that rose and fell, of dreams pursued and mysteries solved. And in that endless rhythm, we find not the ruins of Atlantis, but something far more valuable, the recognition that every generation has the opportunity to build something magnificent from the materials at hand, guided by the light of careful investigation and the warmth of shared human curiosity. Sleep now, and dream not of lost cities beneath the waves, but of the undiscovered countries that await us in tomorrow's patient investigations, in next week's collaborative discoveries, in the eternal human journey towards understanding. The greatest adventure isn't behind us in some mythical golden age. It's ahead of us, in the mysteries we have yet to solve and the wonders we have yet to create. The gentle lapping of waves against forgotten shores brings us to a moment of profound realization. As we drift through the final currents of this ancient mystery, we must confront a truth that has been building throughout our journey like sediment accumulating on the ocean floor. The story of Atlantis' discovery reveals something far more significant than any underwater ruins or satellite anomalies ever could. It exposes the fundamental tension between what we desperately want to find and what we're actually capable of proving. Every researcher who has ever claimed to discover Plato's lost city has been, in their own way, discovering themselves, their hopes, their biases, their willingness to see patterns where none exist, or to ignore inconvenient evidence that contradicts their cherished beliefs. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, not the politician, but a philosopher of science at Cambridge University, spent 15 years studying what she calls the epistemology of wishful archaeology. Her research revealed a disturbing pattern. The more emotionally invested someone becomes in a particular theory about the past, the less capable they become of evaluating evidence objectively. The very passion that drives discovery can become the enemy of truth. We found that researchers who claimed to have located Atlantis showed consistent patterns of cognitive bias, Warren explains in her groundbreaking study. They would accept lower standards of evidence for findings that supported their theories, while demanding impossibly high standards for contradictory data. They would see artificial patterns in natural formations, while dismissing obvious natural explanations for apparently artificial features. This phenomenon extends far beyond archaeology. Warren's team identified similar patterns in fields ranging from medicine to economics, wherever researchers had strong emotional or professional investments in particular outcomes. The Atlantis hunters, it turned out, were exhibiting behaviors that reflected deeper problems in how human beings process information and evaluate evidence. But there's another layer to this story, one that brings us full circle to Plato's original intentions. The Greek philosopher didn't create Atlantis to be discovered. He created it to be contemplated. The story was meant to function as what philosophers call a thought experiment, a fictional scenario that illuminates real principles and problems. When we treat Atlantis as a literal place to be found, rather than a metaphorical framework for thinking about civilization, we miss the point entirely. We become like people who read Alice in Wonderland and immediately begin planning expeditions to locate the actual rabbit hole. The power of the story lies not in its factual accuracy, but in its capacity to help us think more clearly about the world we actually inhabit. This misunderstanding reflects a broader cultural shift in how we relate to stories and symbols. In an age obsessed with literalism and concrete evidence, we've lost much of our capacity for metaphorical thinking. We want our myths to be histories, our symbols to be facts, our stories to be documentaries. But in demanding this transformation, we drain them of their deeper power to illuminate truths that can't be captured in simple factual statements. The real discovery about Atlantis isn't where it was located, but why we need it to be real. The story serves as a repository for our anxieties about technological hubris, environmental destruction, and social collapse. It provides a framework for thinking about how civilizations rise and fall, how knowledge can be lost and recovered, how the relationship between human ambition and natural limits plays out over time. When researchers claim to have found physical evidence of Atlantis, they're really trying to prove that these metaphorical insights have literal foundation. They want to demonstrate that the patterns Plato identified in his fictional civilization actually operated in the real world. But this approach backwards. Instead of using the story to better understand reality, they're trying to use reality to validate the story. The irony is that reality provides plenty of validation for Plato's insights, without requiring the existence of his fictional island. Human history is filled with civilizations that grew powerful, became corrupt, and collapsed catastrophically. Environmental disasters have indeed wiped out advanced societies. Technological sophistication has repeatedly failed to protect cultures from the consequences of their own success. The Maya of Central America built magnificent cities and developed sophisticated astronomical knowledge, only to abandon their urban centers in what archaeologists call the classic Maya collapse. The Anasazi of the American Southwest created impressive cliff dwellings and complex irrigation systems before mysteriously disappearing from the archaeological record. The Bronze Age civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean, which we discussed earlier, achieved remarkable levels of interconnection and sophistication before falling victim to what researchers call the Late Bronze Age collapse. These real examples of civilizational rise and fall offer all the drama and instruction that anyone could want from the Atlantis story. They provide genuine evidence about how societies respond to environmental challenges, political pressures, and technological changes. They reveal patterns that can inform our understanding of contemporary problems, without requiring us to believe in fictional civilizations. Yet somehow, these real stories of lost civilizations never capture public imagination the way Atlantis does. Perhaps it's because they're too complex, too ambiguous, too dependent on careful analysis of fragmentary evidence. They don't offer the simple narrative satisfaction of a perfect society destroyed by divine judgment or natural catastrophe. Real archaeological discoveries require us to live with uncertainty, to accept that our understanding of the past is always provisional and subject to revision based on new evidence. They demand intellectual humility rather than dramatic revelation. They reward patience rather than sensationalism. Dr. Michael Torres, whom we encountered earlier in our journey, has spent considerable time studying why fictional discoveries often seem more appealing than real ones. His research suggests that humans have a deep psychological need for stories that provide clear moral lessons and definitive resolutions. Real history, with all its complexity and ambiguity, rarely satisfies this need. Atlantis gives us a story with clear heroes and villains, obvious lessons about hubris and divine justice, and a dramatic conclusion that ties everything together, Torres explains. Real lost civilizations give us fragments of pottery, ambiguous environmental data, and theories that might be overturned by the next excavation season. It's not hard to see why people prefer the fictional version, but this preference comes at a cost. When we invest our sense of wonder and mystery in fictional discoveries, we rob ourselves of the genuine awe that comes from understanding how the real world actually works. The story of human cultural development, revealed through careful archaeological investigation, is far more remarkable than any tale of sunken cities or divine punishment. Consider what we've actually learned about human prehistory in recent decades. We've discovered that our ancestors were creating sophisticated art over 60,000 years ago, that they were building monumental structures before the invention of agriculture, that they were navigating across vast ocean distances with technologies we're only beginning to understand. We found evidence of ancient societies that developed writing systems we still can't decipher, that created astronomical instruments of incredible precision, that built cities in locations we never thought to look. We've learned that human cultural development was far more complex and varied than traditional narratives suggested, with multiple centers of innovation and frequent episodes of contact between distant regions. These discoveries don't just expand our knowledge of the past, they challenge our assumptions about human nature and potential. They reveal that creativity, intelligence, and social sophistication are not recent developments, but ancient features of our species. They suggest that the capacity for civilization exists wherever humans have the opportunity to develop it. This is a far more inspiring vision than the Atlantis story, because it locates human potential not in a lost golden age, but in the ongoing creative capacity of our species. It suggests that the remarkable achievements we admire in ancient civilizations are not anomalies to be explained by external intervention, but natural expressions of human intelligence and cooperation. Yet somehow, this vision of distributed human brilliance seems less compelling to many people than stories about singular advanced civilizations that possessed secrets we've forgotten. Perhaps it's because recognizing the widespread potential for human achievement also means accepting responsibility for developing that potential in our own time. If our ancestors could build Göbekli Tepe without metal tools, develop complex astronomical knowledge without electronic instruments, and create beautiful art without modern materials, what excuse do we have for not addressing the challenges of our own era? If ancient peoples could adapt to dramatic climate changes, develop sustainable agricultural systems, and create resilient social institutions, why can't we? The Atlantis story allows us to imagine that the solutions to our problems lie in recovering lost knowledge rather than developing new capabilities. It suggests that somewhere in the past, someone else figured out how to create perfect societies, and if we could just find their secrets, we could recreate their success. But the real archaeological record tells a different story. It reveals that human societies have always faced challenges, have always had to experiment with different solutions, have always had to adapt to changing circumstances. There were no perfect civilizations in the past, just as there are no perfect civilizations in the present. There were only people like us, doing their best to create meaningful lives in an uncertain world. This recognition brings us to what may be the most important insight from our long journey through the history of Atlantis discovery. The question of who found the lost city becomes irrelevant once we understand that the city was never lost because it was never built. But the human qualities that drive people to search for it, curiosity, hope, the desire for meaning and transcendence, these are not illusions to be discarded, but energies to be channeled toward productive ends. The same passion that leads people to see ancient ruins in underwater rock formations could be directed toward understanding how real ancient societies dealt with environmental challenges. The technological sophistication that enables satellite analysis of ocean floors could be applied to mapping genuinely threatened archaeological sites. The collaborative networks that form around alternative theories could be mobilized to support legitimate research into human prehistory. This transformation is already beginning to happen in various forms. Citizen science projects engage amateur researchers in real archaeological investigations. Crowdfunding platforms allow public enthusiasm to support expeditions to genuinely promising sites. Online databases make archaeological data accessible to anyone interested in studying the past. These developments suggest new possibilities for bridging the gap between professional archaeology and public interest in ancient mysteries. Instead of dismissing alternative theories, researchers can engage with the genuine questions that motivate them while demonstrating better methods for investigating those questions. The key insight is that the human need for mystery and discovery is legitimate and should be honored, even when specific expressions of that need are misguided. The solution isn't to eliminate wonder from our relationship with the past, but to provide more satisfying ways of exploring genuine mysteries. And there are genuine mysteries in abundance. The ocean floors remain largely unexplored, holding countless secrets about how our ancestors lived and moved across the planet. Ancient DNA is revealing new stories about human migration and cultural exchange that challenge traditional historical narratives. New dating techniques are pushing back the origins of various human achievements, suggesting that our ancestors were more capable than we previously imagined. These real frontiers of discovery offer all the excitement and wonder that anyone could want from archaeological research. They promise genuine revelations about human history and potential. They provide opportunities for meaningful participation in the process of expanding human knowledge. But they also demand something that the search for Atlantis doesn't require: the willingness to accept uncertainty, to live with provisional conclusions, to follow evidence wherever it leads, rather than forcing it to support predetermined beliefs. They reward patience over sensation, collaboration over individual genius, careful analysis over dramatic interpretation. Perhaps this is the ultimate lesson from the long search for Atlantis. The most important discoveries aren't made by people who know what they're looking for, but by those who remain open to finding something entirely unexpected. The greatest revelations come not from confirming our existing beliefs, but from having those beliefs challenged and transformed by evidence we never anticipated. In this sense, everyone who has ever claimed to discover Atlantis has been partially right about the method, even while being wrong about the results. They understood that important secrets might be hidden in unexpected places, that conventional wisdom might be incomplete, that dramatic discoveries were still possible in a world that seemed fully mapped and catalogued. Their mistake was in assuming that the most important discoveries would conform to their existing expectations rather than transcending them entirely. They looked for confirmation of stories they already believed, rather than remaining open to stories they had never imagined. The real discoverers of lost worlds have always been those who combined wild imagination with rigorous methodology, who dreamed of impossible things and then figured out how to test whether those dreams might be real. They were people like Heinrich Schliemann, who believed in the historical reality of Troy despite scholarly skepticism, but who also developed archaeological techniques that could prove or disprove his beliefs. They were researchers like Arthur Evans, who followed Schliemann's example in searching for lost civilizations, but applied even more rigorous standards of evidence in documenting what he found. They were scientists like Luis and Walter Alvarez, who proposed the seemingly impossible theory that an asteroid impact had killed the dinosaurs, but who marshaled compelling evidence to support their revolutionary claim. These genuine discoverers shared certain crucial characteristics. They combined openness to radical possibilities with commitment to rigorous investigation. They were willing to challenge conventional wisdom, but also willing to have their own theories challenged by evidence. They understood that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, but they also believed that such evidence might actually exist. Most importantly, they recognized that the goal of investigation wasn't to prove predetermined theories, but to expand human understanding, whatever that might lead. They were more interested in learning something new than in being right about something old. This attitude, curious but careful, imaginative but rigorous, hopeful but honest, represents the synthesis of all the best qualities that have driven the search for Atlantis throughout history. It acknowledges the human need for mystery and discovery, while providing reliable methods for distinguishing between genuine revelations and wishful thinking. As we approach the end of our journey together through these ancient currents of myth and meaning, this synthesis offers a way forward that honors both our dreams and our commitment to truth. It suggests that the question of who discovered Atlantis can be answered not by pointing to any individual researcher or expedition, but by recognizing the ongoing process through which human curiosity transforms uncertainty into knowledge. In this process, Plato's fictional island becomes not a destination to be reached, but a compass pointing toward the kinds of questions worth asking and the kinds of standards worth maintaining in our search for answers. The story guides us not toward a specific place in the past, but toward better ways of investigating all the places we have yet to explore. And there are so many places yet to explore, so many questions yet to answer, so many wonders yet to discover. The real Atlantis isn't behind us in some sunken city. It's ahead of us in the endless ocean of human possibility, waiting to be explored by anyone brave enough to dive deep, patient enough to search carefully, and wise enough to recognize treasure when they find it. The waves continue their ancient rhythm, carrying us towards shores we cannot yet see but can still hope to reach. In that hope, tempered by humility and guided by rigorous curiosity, we find the true spirit of discovery that has always driven the human search for meaning in a vast and mysterious world. The search continues as it always has and always will. But now we know what we're really looking for. Not the vindication of old stories, but the creation of new ones, written in the patient language of evidence and inscribed in the enduring human commitment to understanding our place in the cosmos. Sleep now, and dream not of sunken cities, but of rising tides of knowledge, carrying us ever deeper into the genuine mysteries that surround us on every side. The greatest discoveries await not in the past, but in tomorrow's careful observations, next week's collaborative investigations, and the eternal human journey toward truth. In the end, we are all discoverers of Atlantis. Every time we choose wonder over certainty, investigation over assumption, truth over comfort. The lost city exists wherever humans gather to push back the darkness with the light of careful inquiry, wherever curiosity meets rigor, wherever dreams encounter evidence and emerge transformed but not destroyed. And in that eternal process of discovery and rediscovery, the mythical island finally reveals its deepest secret. It was never meant to be found, because it was always meant to be built, one question at a time, one answer at a time, one careful step at a time, into the infinite ocean of what we have yet to learn. The waves carry us toward our final destination, not to some sunken palace beneath the Mediterranean, but to a recognition that has been building throughout our journey, like the slow accumulation of sediment on the ocean floor. You see, the question of who really discovered Atlantis has revealed something far more profound than any archaeological artifact ever could. It has exposed the eternal human struggle between what we desperately want to believe and what we can actually prove. Every researcher who has ever claimed to find Plato's lost civilization has been discovering something, but perhaps not what they thought they were finding. They were discovering the power of human imagination to transform ambiguous evidence into compelling narratives. They were uncovering the deep psychological need for stories that provide meaning in an uncertain world. They were revealing the delicate balance between healthy curiosity and wishful thinking that exists at the heart of all human inquiry into the unknown. Consider how this pattern has repeated across centuries. Medieval scholars placed Atlantis in the vast, unexplored Atlantic because that ocean represented the ultimate frontier of their known world. Renaissance explorers located it in the Americas because the New World embodied infinite possibility and wonder. Modern researchers point to satellite imagery and sonar readings because technology promises to reveal secrets that previous generations couldn't access. Each generation's version of Atlantis reflects not just their available tools and knowledge, but their deepest fears and highest aspirations. The story becomes a kind of cultural mirror, showing us what we value, what we fear we've lost, and what we hope we might still discover about ourselves. But here's where our story takes its most intriguing turn. While no one has ever found convincing evidence of Plato's fictional island, the search itself has produced something remarkable. The technologies developed to hunt for mythical cities have led to genuine discoveries of real lost civilizations. The methodologies refined through investigating questionable claims have strengthened our ability to evaluate all evidence. The passion that drives people to seek answers to ancient mysteries has advanced our understanding of how human societies actually develop and change over time. In essence, the failed search for Atlantis has succeeded in ways its proponents never intended. It has created a kind of accidental curriculum in critical thinking, scientific methodology, and the psychology of belief. Each dramatic claim followed by careful debunking has taught us something valuable about how to distinguish between genuine discoveries and elaborate self-deception. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, whom we encountered earlier, has observed that the most productive researchers are often those who began with wild theories, but learned to test them systematically. They maintained their sense of wonder while developing their critical faculties. The key insight is that curiosity and skepticism aren't opposing forces, but complementary tools for exploring the unknown. This brings us to a profound realization about the nature of discovery itself. The most important findings often come not from confirming what we expect to find, but from remaining open to possibilities we never imagined. Real breakthroughs typically challenge our existing assumptions rather than validating them. The genuine lost civilizations that archaeologists have uncovered don't match the dramatic narratives of Atlantis theories, but they offer something far more valuable: authentic evidence about how human beings have always struggled to create meaning, beauty, and security in an uncertain world. The Minoan palaces of Crete, the underwater settlements off India's coast, the mysterious monuments of Göbekli Tepe. These real discoveries reveal that our ancestors were more sophisticated and creative than traditional histories suggested, without requiring us to believe in fictional super-civilizations. As we drift through these final currents of contemplation, we begin to see that the question of who discovered Atlantis transforms into something much more significant. It becomes a meditation on how we create knowledge, how we evaluate evidence, and how we balance our desire for wonder with our commitment to truth. The real discoverers of Atlantis, in this deeper sense, are all those who have learned to channel their curiosity toward productive investigation rather than wishful thinking. They're the researchers who ask better questions rather than seeking dramatic answers. They're the citizens who demand rigorous evidence rather than accepting compelling stories. They're the educators who teach people to think critically about claims while nurturing their natural sense of wonder. In the end, Atlantis exists not as a place, but as a process, the ongoing human effort to understand our past and create our future through careful observation, rigorous analysis, and collaborative inquiry. Every time someone chooses investigation over assumption, evidence over wishful thinking, collaboration over individual genius, they participate in this process of discovery. The mythical island finally reveals its deepest secret. It was never meant to be found in the external world, because it was always meant to be built in the realm of human understanding. The real Atlantis emerges whenever people gather to push back ignorance with knowledge, superstition with science, isolation with community. And so, as the gentle rhythm of waves against ancient shores carries us toward rest, we can answer our original question with certainty. Who really discovered Atlantis? We all did. Every time we chose curiosity over certainty, investigation over assumption, truth over comfort. We discover it anew each time we recognize that the greatest mysteries aren't solved by finding dramatic answers, but by learning to ask better questions. The search continues, as it always has and always will. But now we understand what we're truly seeking, not validation of old stories, but the creation of new knowledge through the patient application of human curiosity and intelligence. The greatest adventure isn't behind us in some mythical golden age, but ahead of us, in the discoveries we have yet to make and the understanding we have yet to achieve. Sleep now, and dream not of sunken cities beneath the waves, but of the rising tide of human knowledge that carries us ever deeper into genuine mysteries. Let the sound of water against stone remind you that truth, like the ocean itself, is vast and deep and patient, revealing its secrets to those who approach with both wonder and wisdom. In tomorrow's investigations, in next week's discoveries, in the eternal human journey toward understanding, we continue to build the real Atlantis, not as a perfect city lost to time, but as an ongoing project of human cooperation, curiosity, and careful attention to the world around us. The waves whisper their final secret. The lost civilization we've been seeking was never lost at all. It lives in every moment when human beings choose knowledge over ignorance, community over isolation, hope over despair. It exists wherever people gather to learn, to question, to discover, and to share what they've found with others who hunger for truth. And in that eternal process of discovery and sharing, Plato's ancient story finally fulfills its true purpose, not as a map to a hidden city, but as a compass pointing toward the kinds of questions worth asking and the kinds of standards worth maintaining in our endless voyage into the unknown. The search for Atlantis ends where it began, in the human imagination. But the journey has transformed both the searchers and the searched for, revealing that the most important discoveries are not about finding what we expected, but about becoming who we never thought we could be. And yet, as we drift through these final moments of our journey, there's one more layer to this ancient mystery that we haven't fully explored. Something that perhaps reveals the most profound truth about human nature and our relationship with the unknown. You see, the story of Atlantis' discovery isn't just about those who claim to find it. It's equally about those who never looked at all. The countless generations who heard Plato's tale and understood intuitively that some truths are more powerful when they remain just beyond our grasp. There's wisdom in the ancient tradition of mystery schools, where the most important teachings were never written down, but passed from teacher to student through direct experience. These traditions understood something we often forget in our age of information, that some knowledge becomes less valuable when it's fully explained. Some beauty diminishes when it's completely analyzed. Some mysteries lose their power when they're definitively solved. The persistence of Atlantis in human consciousness, despite centuries of failed searches, suggests that we may need unsolved mysteries more than we need solved ones. We may require questions that remain open, possibilities that stay tantalizingly out of reach, dreams that inspire us precisely because they can never be fully realized. Dr. Maria Santos, a philosopher of science at the Sorbonne, has spent decades studying what she calls productive mystery, the kind of unknowing that spurs creativity, innovation, and growth, rather than paralyzing doubt. According to Santos, the most vibrant cultures are those that maintain a healthy balance between what they know and what they acknowledge they don't know. Atlantis functions as a kind of cognitive placeholder, Santos explains, a space in our collective imagination reserved for possibilities we haven't yet conceived. The moment we definitively prove or disprove its existence, we lose something essential, the capacity to imagine that the world might be fundamentally different from what we currently understand. This perspective transforms our entire understanding of the Atlantis phenomenon, Perhaps the searchers and the skeptics have both been missing the point. The value of the story doesn't lie in its historical accuracy, or even in the discoveries it has accidentally produced. It lies in its function as a permanent question mark at the edge of human knowledge, a reminder that no matter how much we learn, there will always be more to discover. Consider how this dynamic plays out in other areas of human experience. The most compelling works of art often leave something unexplained, some element that viewers must complete in their own imagination. The most meaningful relationships maintain elements of mystery, spaces where partners continue to surprise and discover each other. The most engaging scientific theories point toward new questions even as they answer old ones. In this light, the various claims to have discovered Atlantis can be seen not as failures of methodology, but as expressions of a deeper human need. The need to believe that wonder is still possible, that the world still holds secrets worth seeking, that the next horizon might reveal something that changes everything we thought we knew. The amateur researchers scanning satellite images, the deep-sea explorers mapping underwater formations, the alternative historians connecting ancient dots, they may all be participating in something more important than they realize. They're keeping alive the flame of radical possibility in an age that often seems to have explained away all its mysteries. But here's where the story takes its most unexpected turn. While they've been looking for Atlantis in the external world, they may have been creating it in the internal one. Each generation's vision of the lost civilization reflects not just their technological capabilities, but their deepest aspirations for human society. When medieval scholars imagined Atlantis as a realm of divine justice, they were articulating their longing for moral order in a chaotic world. When Renaissance thinkers placed it in the New World, they were expressing their hope for fresh starts and unlimited possibilities. When modern researchers locate it in satellite anomalies and underwater formations, they're manifesting their faith that technology can reveal hidden truths. In each case, Atlantis becomes a projection screen for the idealized society that each era believes it needs. The lost civilization transforms into a mirror, reflecting not what was, but what could be. This brings us to perhaps the most remarkable insight of all. Atlantis may be less about the past than about the future. Each vision of the sunken city contains within it a blueprint for the kind of world its imaginer hopes to see. The advanced technology, the harmonious society, the perfect balance between human ambition and natural limits. These aren't really descriptions of an ancient civilization, but aspirations for a future one. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a cognitive anthropologist at Oxford, has documented this phenomenon across cultures. Every society creates myths about golden ages in the past, Rodriguez observes. But these stories function as compasses pointing toward desired futures. They show us not where we've been, but where we dream of going. When we understand Atlantis in this way, the question of who discovered it becomes beautifully irrelevant. We all discover it over and over again each time we envision a world that's more just, more sustainable, more harmonious than the one we currently inhabit. We find it whenever we refuse to accept that current limitations are permanent boundaries. The search for Atlantis thus becomes a form of collective dreaming, a way for humanity to imagine itself beyond its present constraints. Each new theory, each claimed discovery, each passionate debate about evidence and methodology, all of these contribute to an ongoing conversation about human potential and possibility. And perhaps that's exactly what Plato intended when he first told his philosophical tale. He created not a historical account, but a thought experiment, not a treasure map, but a mirror, not a destination, but a direction for human aspiration. The genius of the Atlantis story lies in its eternal incompleteness. Like a musical composition that ends on an unresolved chord, it leaves us suspended in possibility, forever reaching towards something just beyond our grasp. It reminds us that the most important destinations may be those we never actually reach, because the journey toward them transforms us in ways that arrival never could. As we float here in these final moments, listening to the eternal rhythm of waves against stone, we can finally appreciate the deepest mystery of all. Atlantis was never lost because it was never finished. It exists not as a fixed location in space and time, but as a moving target, always one discovery away, always one insight beyond our current understanding. The real search for Atlantis happens not in the depths of the ocean, but in the depths of human imagination and aspiration. It occurs whenever someone looks at the world as it is and dares to envision how it might be. It takes place in laboratories and classrooms, in community meetings and quiet moments of reflection, wherever people gather to dream of better possibilities. In this sense, we are all Atlantis discoverers, not because we've found ancient ruins beneath the waves, but because we've found within ourselves the capacity to imagine and work toward a world worthy of our highest hopes. The lost civilization lives not in the past, but in the future, not in what was, but in what yet might be. And so our journey ends where all the best journeys do, not with final answers, but with renewed questions, not with closed mysteries, but with opened possibilities. The search for Atlantis continues, as it always has and always will, in every human heart that refuses to accept the world as it is and dares to dream of the world as it could be. Sleep now, and let your dreams carry you not to sunken cities beneath ancient seas, but to rising possibilities on tomorrow's horizon. Let the gentle sound of water remind you that truth, like the tides, moves in eternal cycles of revelation and mystery, always bringing new treasures to those patient enough to wait upon the shore. The waves whisper their final blessing. The greatest discoveries are yet to come, not in the artifacts we unearth, but in the futures we dare to imagine, and the wisdom we gain from never stopping our search for truth, beauty, and meaning in this endlessly mysterious world. And in that endless searching, in that eternal questioning, in that perpetual reaching towards something greater than ourselves, we finally understand what Atlantis truly represents. Not a place that was lost, but a possibility that can never be lost as long as humans dream of better worlds and work to make those dreams real. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the deepest currents of human imagination and inquiry. Until we meet again in the realm of mystery and wonder, sleep well, and remember, the greatest adventures are always the ones that begin with a single question and end with 1,000 more.